Triple H was interviewed by The Athletic during WrestleMania 38 week in Dallas. And there was a whole article about WWE's recruitment process and NXT, the NXT relaunch. And they interviewed him. They interviewed Triple H. And I wanted to pull some of the quotes here and just talk about this briefly because it was very interesting to see some of the answers that he gave. But this is what he said about NXT. He said there was this point where NXT was on the network, had this cult following, and we needed to get on television. How do we do that? We need more experience, need to professionalize this a little bit to make the product to where fans want to see that. We got them to that place. The pandemic messed it up a little bit because it was right when we went on TV and we had to shift our focus, doing it in front of no people. It completely altered what we were doing. We couldn't recruit or train talent for almost 2 years. Now that sounds ridiculous. Of course they were training people. I assume he meant train them as far as giving them matches in front of actual audiences, which is what they were doing before the pandemic. They would run those small shows all around the Florida circuit. They did this whole Florida loop and they would do these live events there. Maybe they would only have 200 or 300 people, 500 people, but they were at least able to run in front of actual human beings. Yeah, because if you're constantly training in the ring but not actually wrestling in front of an audience, there's only so much you're going to be able to learn in the span of 2 years. So I assume that's what he meant. The idea that nobody trained in 2 years is fucking ridiculous. Then we said, okay, let's reboot it and go back to what we originally were. Some of these people won't be ready for television, but we're going to put them on television. And we believe the audience is invested enough that the numbers might come down, but a core group of them will stay. And now you're creating fresh stars all the time. That's where we are now. The numbers have stabilized. People like Braun Breaker, he's been training for a year. Half the women, they've been here a year maybe. That's a lot. That's just so fresh and new. People used to say the constant churn of NXT was a negative. The churn is what's great about it. The people here now, hopefully a year and a half from now, none of them are even in NXT anymore. And the ones that make it will be on Raw or SmackDown. That's the magic. It truly is the developmental league, the college football, AAA baseball. Yeah, they're not all quite ready to be in that major league role yet, but you're discovering them before they become household names. That is quite the shift from what Triple H was saying publicly when he said he disliked the term developmental because it made the brand sound less than. He considered NXT the third brand next to Raw and SmackDown. He was very clear about this. Conference calls, interviews. This ain't developmental no more. We're the third brand. So was he full of shit back then? Or did he really believe that and he's full of shit now? Because those are really the only two options. Either he was full of shit then or he's full of shit now. 3 years ago, he was insulted by the term. Now he wears it like a badge of honor. He said, we were talking about this shift anyway. That's where we were headed. It happened in a period of time where I had to leave for a little bit. Luckily, Shawn Michaels had been doing it with me all that time, so it was a seamless thing. I stepped out, did what I needed to do, but that team has killed it. They've really created a show where you can really say that's the next generation of stars. The team has killed it. What team? They fired nearly every member of his team. Shawn was the only one left. And Matt Bloom. It's a little disingenuous of him to make it sound like the pandemic hit right when they went to TV. They went to TV in September. COVID didn't shut everything down until March. But what did happen in between that time is that AEW Dynamite debuted on TNT. And as time went on, they got their ass handed to them most weeks, to the point where they moved the show to another night eventually. You know, a lot of the stuff that he said in that interview sounds like damage control. It sounds that way because that's what it is, right? Not that there isn't a benefit. I'm not saying every single thing he said in those comments is untrue. Of course, they are trying to create the next generation of stars, and there are positives to that system. And I'm not saying there isn't a benefit to them now trying to create stars from scratch. I'm not saying that's a bad thing. But do you honestly believe, stop what you're doing and think about this. Do you honestly believe that if NXT was killing it on television, I'm not saying 1 million viewers a week, if NXT was doing well on television, and they were beating AEW on most weeks, and the audience was there, the audience was telling you that they like the show, what you're doing is working, the formula is working, do you honestly believe that they would have made wholesale changes the way they did and blew the whole fucking thing up when they did? I don't believe that for a second. He's being a good little soldier. He's saying all the right things. You know, not to worry. This was our plan all along. Please. I was born during the day, but not yesterday. He is right about this. Once the pandemic did hit and shut everything down, what hurt NXT just as much as the rise of AEW did was the lack of big crowds for those takeover shows. Those takeover shows and those rabid NXT audiences, the one they used to get at Full Sail and stuff, but especially those takeover shows, I mean, that was the lifeblood of that brand. All the audiences, would chant NXT, and Triple H would come out, "We are NXT," and then they would build to these takeovers, and they could pack 5,000 people depending on the city, if it was Chicago or if it was New York. And I've been in some of those buildings at some of those takeover shows in Brooklyn, in New York, other places. And just the energy and the vibe. The people believed in it. They were loyal to the brand. They were loyal to the initials. And there was a certain energy when you would tune into those shows. How many times did we talk about TakeOver is going to blow the pay-per-view the next day out of the water because TakeOver would always run the day before. And they would almost always outshine the main roster. This was becoming a common theme. That was the lifeblood of NXT. The moment that got taken away from them, it completely sucked the life right out of those shows. The television shows also, but especially those takeovers. And it was never the same after that. And so he's not wrong about that. That also dealt a mortal blow to NXT.